All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and good evening, Simon. Nice to have you on board again. Thank you for making the time, and thank you for waking up super early. I just want to see if we have any folks on board with us yet. Yes, we got a couple, 14. So while we're waiting for more people to join, I'll just run through the formalities before I hand over to Simon. So yeah, just bear with me while I get the screen going here. All right, let's see. Okay, so from my side, welcome everybody wherever you are in the world. It's nice and chilly here in Johannesburg. Simon's side, I think it's about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, so super early. And yeah, wherever else you are, thanks a lot. I hope you're going to enjoy the webinar. For those folks that don't know me, my name is Morne Christo. I'm the host this evening and also the CEO of Dan Southern Africa. Thank you for making time to join the webinar. And as always, thank you for supporting Divers Alert Network. We try and make diving safer and share a bunch of messages to help advance that cause. All right, so the talk topic this evening is blood gas measurements in an extreme diver. I hope you're going to enjoy the topic. I'm certainly looking forward to it. And once I hand over to Simon, he'll get kick-started on that. Just a couple of webinar basics, your video and microphones turned off. If you have any comments, use the comments box. In the meantime, let us know who you are and where you are in the world, and if you have any expectations. And then during the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the comments box, but use hashtag ask followed by your question. We'll then pick that up and do our best to answer any questions you might have. As usual, the replay will be available via the Dan Southern Africa YouTube channel tomorrow. You'll also receive an email with the replay link and a bunch of Dan resources, along with links to Simon's websites and various other resources. So yeah, keep a lookout for that. From my side, again, just thank you for supporting Dan. If you're not a Dan member yet, you're more than welcome to join today. And the best place to learn about Dan is on any of the Dan regional websites. If you're in Southern Africa, it's dansa.org. In the USA, it's dan.org. In Europe, it's daneurope.org. And in Asia Pacific, it's danap.org. And to all the active Dan members, thank you for your ongoing support. And for any of you that are keen to help grow our YouTube channel, we do have the YouTube super chat function enabled. So if you'd like, you can donate there. It's a little $ to the left, right, or top, bottom of the comments box. If you click on that, you can leave a comment, decide what you'd like to donate, and that will push your comment up to the top with a bit of animation, or you can simply just add a super chat sticker and let us know that you appreciate it. If you do decide to do that, thank you very much. I appreciate that. As usual, I have a free Dan gift for you. This time it's the Heart and Diving Guide. And if you don't have a copy of this yet, it's quite easy to get hold of it. You can see that QR code on the screen right now. All you need to do is just take out your smartphone. If you've got a QR code scanner, you can open that, or just open up your camera app. It should pick it up. Once you've scanned that, it'll open up a pre-populated WhatsApp message. And all you need to do is just add your name and surname, hit the send button, and I'll respond with a download link with a bunch of additional extra bonus gifts that you can download and view, etc., etc. So yeah, I can see some of them coming through. If you don't have it yet, scan that code. It'll pre-populate the message. And yeah, just add your name, surname, and I will then respond with a download link to the guide. All right, if I remember, I'll add this QR code at the end of the presentation. If not, just rewind tomorrow when the replay is available. Anyways, from our side, if you haven't subscribed to our Dan Southern Africa YouTube channel yet, please hit that subscribe button now. That'll help YouTube promote it to other like-minded divers and folks around the world. And while you're waiting for Simon to start his talk, please hit that share button and invite any of your dive buddies and friends to also participate in this talk this evening. And at the end of the talk, if you enjoyed it, then hit the like or love button, and that'll obviously help YouTube share this video amongst other divers as well. All right, let's see what else I have. Let's meet our guest speaker, Professor Simon Mitchell. He is an anesthesiologist and diving physician who has widely published over 160 scientific papers. He's the co-author of the 5th edition of the Diving and Subaquatic Medicine and the Hyperbaric and Diving Medicine chapter of the last 3 editions of the Harrison Principles of the International Medicine. He's also got a long career in sports, scientific, commercial, military, and exploratory diving. So well versed in all aspects of diving. So I hope you're going to enjoy the talk that he has. Without any further ado, let's get started. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will hand over to Simon. Okay, we've got some folks already that have joined. Let me just move this apart. Okay, there we go. Simon, I've handed over to you. You've got the reins for everybody that's joined. Thank you very much. And Simon, thank you for making time to talk to us.
It's a pleasure, Mornay. Thank you for the invitation. I think one of the things I often say when I'm traveling long distances overseas to give talks or doing something like this at 4 a.m, people say, wow, that's dedicated. And actually, look, my answer is I love this stuff. And if we're not prepared to talk about it, what's the point of doing all this work? So I feel privileged to be given an audience. So thank you for that. I'm going to be talking about something that I'm not traditionally seen as an expert in, and that is breath hold diving, free diving. But I'll explain how we became interested in this and fascinated by it. And I hope that I'm going to present to you some work today, which was groundbreaking when we did it a year ago. And I hope you find it really interesting. I think the other thing about this particular piece of work is that it really illustrates the fabulous thing about our field, the diving and hyperbaric medicine field, but diving medicine in particular, that there are still lots of super cool, low-hanging fruit type questions that you can answer with relatively small studies that in any other field would have been answered 50 years ago. But because of the limited resources in diving medicine, there's still lots of stuff that, junior doctors or budding scientists can get their teeth into and have a huge amount of fun doing. This is a perfect example of that. And I think it is one of the really cool things about the diving medicine field. So look, I'll carry on now with this talk. Before I do, I do feel it necessary to acknowledge the loss that your community, and actually indeed the entire international diving medicine community, suffered just a month or so ago with the passing of Cecilia Roberts in tragic circumstances. Many of you will have known Cecilia. This is actually her in New Zealand about 5 years ago when she came to explore the possibility of coming in and becoming an anaesthetist in our training scheme here. Look, our community in this part of the world, we all knew her. We knew her to be a delightful, ethical, knowledgeable, star-bright woman who we all kind of loved. And, she was one of South Africa's gifts to our world. And we mourn her loss along with you guys. It's a terrible thing. This is kind of how you remember Cecilia. She was an adventurer in all sorts of activities. This is down at Lake Wanaka in the South Island in New Zealand. She loved her mountain biking. She did lots of it in South Africa. There are probably some of you on this call who've been biking with her. Anyway, I want to acknowledge her loss and say how devastated we are down here, and actually say that if Cecilia were alive, she would love the fact that we're doing this, that we have this linkage and we're sharing our knowledge together. So I'm sure she's looking in on this. Right, so moving on. So freediving is an activity that is gaining in popularity all around the world. It's really interesting. In the sort of 70s and 80s, freediving had quite a strong following among spearfishermen, of course, because that was how it was done. But in this modern day and age, freediving of itself, as an activity on its own, has gained a huge amount of popularity and following. And there is an organization called AIDA, the International Association for the Development of Apnea, that is essentially the world's governing body, and particularly in relation to the various competitions that take place. And they're the custodians of the world records, etc. And just to give you a sense of how developed this has become and how spectacular some of the achievements are, I'll just show you a little screen grab from their page on world records. This is the male page. There's a female page as well, but they have various categories, and I'm not going to go through all of them. But I think it's worth reflecting on how spectacular some of this stuff is. So the no limits world record, you see down there on the bottom row, Herbert Nietzsche. That's where they use a sled to ride down and a balloon to ride back up. I mean, I'm not quite sure what all that means, but in terms of, it's not what people regard as the purest form of freediving, but 214 meters, absolutely extraordinary. But up on the top row there, the dynamic apnea with fins record is shared. And what that is swimming in a swimming pool. And I guess everyone on this call can conceptualize a 50-meter Olympic pool, right? Well, the record is 300 meters. That's 6 lengths of a pool, on one breath. 6 lengths. And then the longest a guy has lain in the water with his face in the water, holding his breath on one breath, is 11 minutes 35 seconds. I mean, it's extraordinary what these people are achieving. But I mean, these are the records at the very edge of achievement. I think what we should acknowledge is there's lots of people, and probably some on this call, who are gaining a lot of pleasure and satisfaction from freediving to much lesser extremes than you see here. But it is amazing to reflect on what these people can do. So all of this carries risks, and among those risks, especially in any of the disciplines that involve diving down and coming back up, there's this phenomenon called shallow water blackout. And essentially what this is a phenomenon where we see people lose consciousness during ascent, particularly in the sort of last phases of the ascent near the surface. And the received wisdom to explain these so-called shallow water blackouts kind of goes like this. So we just work our way around this diagram. And what the divers typically do is they hyperventilate to some extent before they dive. And some also indulge in this process of so-called glossopharyngeal insufflation, where they essentially swallow more air into their lungs and inflate their lungs to an extent that's greater than you can by just simply inhaling. And what that achieves is a small increase in the arterial oxygen. I'll illustrate this a little bit later on. And some degree of, if you insufflate your lungs more, you're carrying more gas. But of course, hyperventilation is very effective at lowering the arterial pressure of CO2. And of course, it's CO2, not on its own, but which is the primary driver to breathe. And so by lowering it, you're taking yourself further away from a critical stimulus to want to breathe. So that happens before descent. And then on descent, the fascinating thing about this, and look, this was to a large extent speculation until relatively recently, that the lungs would be compressed. And although you're holding your breath and consuming oxygen, paradoxically, the arterial pressure of oxygen would actually increase because you're compressing the gas in your lungs into a smaller space, increasing the alveolar oxygen, and that would be transmitted into the arterial blood. So then when you're at depth, of course, you're consuming oxygen, but that increase in the arterial PO2 that you've achieved by compressing your lungs would provide a degree of apnea comfort. So it would make you feel better in the process of holding your breath. And then, of course, when you turn to come to the surface, the opposite occurs. So now you've removed some oxygen from the alveoli, and the lungs are expanding as you come towards the surface. So the alveolar PO2 is falling very quickly, and that can result in a critically low arterial pressure of oxygen. In other words, you're going from a relatively high PO2 to a very low one in a very short space of time. A critically low arterial oxygen with reduced oxygen carriage, and this danger of blackout as the lungs are rapidly expanding as you get towards the surface. And that's believed to have been the reason why we see these blackouts just before the divers get back to the surface. So this is this thing called shallow water blackout. However, this paradigm was essentially non-substantiated by human data in extreme dives. Now there were some relevant data, and I'll briefly describe this to you. So there was a paper by Klaus Martin Muth and his colleagues in Germany, which was actually quite a while ago, 20 years ago, where they compressed divers to 20 meters in a wet chamber over a period of a minute. They had 2 or 3 minutes at the bottom at depth. They're in a wet chamber, and then a 1 minute decompression. So this isn't a typical competition deep free dive. It's a sort of slightly different thing. And of course, in a wet chamber, you can't really achieve the same pressure changes or rapidity of pressure changes that you see in open water. But what they showed was they bore out that pathophysiological paradigm that I just described to some extent. So what you see is the traces for two divers doing an individual dive, but plotted on the same graph. So that's PO2 in kilopascals on the y-axis and time essentially on the x-axis. And you can see that they start with a moderately high PO2 at the upper limit of normal for an air-breathing person at the surface before diving, and then indeed their arterial PO2. So they had an arterial catheter in these divers. Their arterial PO2 jumps up to 30 kilopascals at the bottom, and then over the period of time sitting 2 to 3 minutes at the bottom. These guys were obviously very accomplished free divers to be able to do this. The PO2 falls, and then it falls even further during the ascent to the surface to quite low levels, in fact, so down around 5 kilopascals. So, that is in keeping with what the paradigm that I just described. And those dotted lines at the bottom are the arterial CO2, which sort of increase steadily during the period of the dive. Now, of course, as I pointed out, that's not the same rapidity of pressure change that you see in a real free dive, and it's not a typical competition down to a very deep depth and then back up to the surface without that period at the bottom that these guys had. So it's an unusual profile for a free diver, or for a competition free diver. So then, much more recently, so 2018, Gerardo Bosco and his group in Italy, using the Y40 pool in Italy, I forget where it is. It's in Italy somewhere, I can't remember the city. And they did something similar. So they put a arterial catheter in a radial artery, and they had 6 divers do a dive to the bottom of the pool, 40 meters, where these were sled assisted, as you can see in that photo. And they took a gas at the bottom, and then they took a gas back at the surface, but only within several minutes after the divers started breathing. So that data for after breathing is not really of any real benefit to us, because the divers were breathing again. We didn't see what their PO2 was just before they breathed at the end of the dive. But again, in 4 out of their 6 subjects, they showed the spike in arterial PO2 at depth. So, that kind of bears out the paradigm that I just described. And then we didn't have the after breathing data. Now, they actually did do a second study in which they took gases at the surface before breathing, but they didn't have a gas at the bottom before the ascent. So at this point in time, when they conducted this work, we didn't have, so I think this next slide. So what was lacking was blood gases in deep breath hold dive, so deeper than 40 meters, in true open water competition format, in one of the disciplines that AIDA recognizes, with specimens at depth at the bottom and at the surface before breathing on the same dive. No one had ever done that. And that was essentially what we set out to do. Now, I was actually inspired on this about 10 years earlier, or well, 12 years earlier, by Mike Grocott from University College London, I think is where he works. He was the first person to take arterial blood gases in an air breathing subject on the summit of Everest. And he got himself onto the, an original article in the New England Journal for that. And I remember seeing this article and thinking, we could do this in freedivers. And over the years, so it's kind of like the opposite to what he did. He was on a mountain, we could do it underwater. And both are massive challenges for obvious reasons. And so, I pushed this idea at a number of our anesthesiology residents who were looking for research projects. And, a number of people talked about it. And, I'm sure there's other scientists on this call. You just get very busy and it's hard to drive it all yourself. The first guy that picked it up and actually ran with it was this young man called Tom Scott, who's one of our anesthesiology residents or registrars, who himself is quite a keen freediver. And so we finally got around to trying to fulfill that goal I articulated before in January last year. Now, of course, we needed to find a freediver capable of, our target was a 60-meter dive, and we needed to find a freediver capable of diving to 60 meters, pausing briefly while we took an arterial blood gas, and then going back to the surface and holding his breath at the surface until we took another gas. And of course, he had to be happy to have an arterial line put in. Not everyone's keen on that. We only have two freedivers in New Zealand probably who would be capable of that. One is William Truebridge, who is quite famous, and he actually lives in the Bahamas, so he was not really an option. And then there was this guy, Dave Mullins, who is a very accomplished freediver, but flies under the radar to a large extent. He does have a Wikipedia page, and he was the previous world record holder for constant weight with fins at 126 meters. And in fact, a previous record holder in the dynamic apnea with fins, so swimming in the swimming pool, 265 meters. That record's now 300 meters. So a very accomplished freediver and a bit of a physiological freak, truth be known. If you look at his spirometry, you can see lots of supranormal figures there. And look, I won't go through them all, but probably the most fascinating one for me is right down at the bottom where you see his functional residual capacity there, 6.3 liters, 6.28 liters, 167% of normal. I mean, that just struck me because I'm actually not a bad freediver myself. I used to be. I've spearfished a lot and had a national title at one point, but 6.3 liters is my TLC, it's my total lung capacity, and that's his functional residual capacity. So you can see why this guy has got a natural physiological advantage over all of us mere mortals who try to do this with relatively normal lung volumes. So Dave was our subject, and this was our plan. So this was essentially what we were hoping to do. Given that no one else had done this before, we were not 100% certain it would be possible, but lots of moving parts and lots of things that had to work in order for this to happen. So we put a left radial arterial catheter in. I mean, I'm an anesthesiologist. I do this every day, but I'll talk about why that was quite challenging a little bit in a few moments. Connect it to an ultra low volume splitting device. I'll show you a picture of that soon. So that we could connect two syringes simultaneously, one for taking a sample at the bottom and leaving it on there, and then taking a sample at the surface very quickly. All of this had to happen really quickly. So an ultra low volume splitter, take a surface baseline gas, just sitting resting on the surface on the boat. And then after his typical pre-dive hyperventilation lung packing routine, and then 2 syringes connected, a breath hold dive to 60 meters. We'd have a mixed gas diver at depth. That was going to be me. At 60 meters, waiting there, take an arterial blood gas specimen at the bottom, leave it attached to Dave, and then so he's still got 1 syringe that's empty, comes back to the surface, and someone at the surface, that would be Tom, the anaesthetic registrar, he'd take the second arterial blood gas at the surface before Dave took a breath. And then we also planned to do a surface apnea. On the same day, we would do a surface apnea, so just lying on the surface, head in the water, of exactly the same duration and arterial blood gas sampling times as the dive to 60 meters. And then, of course, we had to convince an ethics committee that all of this was, okay, which was, we actually anticipated having a bit of trouble with that. But in the end, the way we sold it was that, well, this is, a dive that he's very capable of doing and does, in fact, do it for training purposes. And then the mixed gas divers, I dive to much deeper than 60 meters on a fairly regular basis. So all of that sort of, the main difference was just having an arterial catheter, and they bought that, so we didn't have any problems with it. So we did go to some trouble to test all this. So Tom Scott, in true Edgar Pask spirit. So Edgar Pask was a British anaesthetist who, during the Second World War, tested life jackets on himself to see what configuration they would hold an unconscious person in the water in. And so he actually was anaesthetized on the end of a long anesthetic circuit with a life jacket on, floating free in the water, unconscious. Had to be admitted to hospital on a number of occasions because of water aspiration. So he's a true hero of anesthetic research. So Tom put himself out there and allowed me to put an arterial catheter in him about a week before we actually did the real thing, just so that we could test the waterproofing and the dressing, because obviously it was going to be in the water and needed to survive for a period of time in the water. So there's the catheter in Tom's arm, and you can see that low volume splitter. So those tubes actually look quite wide, but they're thick walled and very thin internal diameter. So they actually, each one of those limbs only has an internal volume of just under 0.5 ml, so very small internal volume. And that's the final configuration on Tom's wrist. So with 2 syringes, each with a small amount of heparinized saline in it. So the idea would be that when Dave reached depth, I would inject a small amount of heparinized saline just to make sure there was no clot in the catheter, and then aspirate and isolate the syringe, so using those clips that you see there. And that process would only take, 10 to 12 seconds. And the thing was all reinforced with special sticky stuff on the skin called Fry's Balsam, and then the Sleek tape over the top of it. If you ever want to waterproof something underwater, Sleek is your friend. It works really well. So we'd borrowed a couple of iStat Alinity blood gas analyzers to take with us to Taupo, the lake where we were going to do this. And we also ran some gases on that practice day at the swimming pool, just to make sure we were familiar with this process. The little things you have to think of in a research project like this include, your collaborators being properly trained on this device, so that the results really are meaningful, and we can convincingly say that we had a properly trained person doing it. So there's Tom in the swimming pool, swimming around just to see whether the waterproof dressings would work. Another little thing that was a potential issue, and it's just an example of the sorts of things you have to think of in projects like this. So the point of care gas analyzing person who trained us on the iStat device was very keen we used heparinized syringes. We actually don't always use heparinized syringes in the hospital, but she was pretty keen, as opposed to using a standard syringe. But what we noticed with those heparinized syringes is they had quite a big gap in this between the 2 sealing flanges on the syringe plunger, which you can see there, it's self-apparent, in comparison to a standard syringe, which had wider sealing edges and a much smaller gap between them. We're just worried that that big gap with quite a lot of air in there between those two flanges might actually cause compression of those flanges inwards and result in the syringe becoming incompetent. So when you aspirate it on it, you might aspirate lake water across the back of the syringe plunger. So we actually we decided to test that in the hyperbaric chamber. So I took a bucket of water and an example of each one of those syringes into the chamber to 60 meters and had them underwater, blocked off at the front and aspirated on them. And indeed, those heparinized syringes became incompetent at 50 meters. So we decided not to use them. It's just an example of the sorts of things, the sort of attention to detail that you need in a project like this. So this all happened in January 2021. Here's Dave. This was actually the night before with me, just checking that he had an ulnar artery. Actually, you know, for the clinicians amongst you, you will know this. When we put arterial catheters in, we're supposed to check that the patient has an ulnar artery before we do it. We frequently don't, but yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. So that's just making sure his ulnar artery was present and patent, just in case I messed up his radial artery with the catheter. We did this at Lake Taupo, beautiful lake in central North Island, New Zealand. We had two boats. Those are the two boats there, just essentially runabout sized boats. And we'd also borrowed the Freediving New Zealand, excuse me, platform where they have this boom mounted in the small inflatable. One end of the boom, the line hangs down to the prescribed depth. You know, it's a very precisely calibrated line. But the way they run these freediving competitions is they have that line running across that boom. You might be able to see my cursor, and then out this other end here where there's a weight, like a counterbalance, because the divers are attached to the downline by a carabiner. And if they fail to turn up back on the surface or something goes wrong, they can release a quick release. And this counterweight at this end of the boom will sink and pull the diver up to the surface, basically using the carabiner as the attachment. So we used a proper freediving competition platform for this project. So as you can see, beautiful conditions. You know, that was the first bit of really good luck that we needed. You know, to do this on a calm surface was always going to be easier. Then I had to put this catheter in Dave. Now, it had to go in after he put his wetsuit on. They use these really tight closed cell neoprene wetsuits for thermal protection. And one of the things we hadn't anticipated and hadn't seen with Tom the week prior was that this suit was incredibly tight. And when he folded it back for me to do the arterial catheter, it was like an arterial tourniquet, and you just literally couldn't feel any kind of pulse. So luckily I had my little ultrasound with me and was able to use that. This was done at a picnic bench at a campground across the road from the launching ramp. I mean, it's unusual conditions. And of course, it was a lot riding on this. It was probably the most nervous. I mean, I put dozens of arterial catheters in, you know, like we do it every day pretty much. But this had to go in the left radial because he turns with his right hand, as you'll see. So it had to go in the left, and we really only wanted one hole because we didn't want any. We're putting heparinized saline through it, and we'd learned the week before actually with Tom that the heparinized saline, when you pull the catheter out, there's obviously a little bit of heparin hanging around, and you have to really put a lot of pressure on the site for a period of time so it clots properly. So we didn't want more than one hole. So there was a lot riding on this, but anyway, good outcome. We managed to get the catheter in with one go, and lots of smiles all around once that was done. So here we are going out to put we actually anchored the runabout and had the freediving platform tied alongside, and we had the other boat as a sort of roving safety boat, if you will, just in case something went wrong and we had to go to shore quickly. So this was just making sure everything was working before the dive. We actually did 2 dives. Dave was amazing. You know, like he did a 160-meter dive, and we had a contingency plan that we would wait down there in case he did a second dive. And in fact, he did. He managed to do 2 60-meter dives. So we got data from 2 dives, and then that surface apnea that I told you about before. So this is me jumping into the water to go down to 60 meters. Myself and Pete Mesley did this. It was great having Pete. You know, obviously I needed a buddy, but also he videoed the whole thing. So he made it, you know, we got some great imagery of the whole thing happening. As you can see, Dave on the right there, who he was in the water doing a few little workup dives just to get himself in the groove. And you can see that he doesn't wear a mask. He just has a nose clip and some little goggles that are actually full of water, and they're sort of tailor-made so that you can still see a little bit through them. So there he is. Yeah. So just getting himself ready, and you know, these guys have a routine. They get themselves in the zone to do this. And I must say, it was just amazing to watch this incredible athlete, you know, pull 2 60-meter dives in the space of, we stayed down there for 35 minutes. We had about 2 hours of decompression. So this is me. That's my rebreather controller. You can see on my arm there. And I'm sitting now waiting at 60 meters. That's Pete with his video lights on, ready to video the whole thing. And this is it. So this, you're about to see a video of the first time an arterial blood gas has been taken at, you know, what you might call moderate depth in open water conditions in true competition format. So this is Dave coming down. Hopefully this will activate. Whoops. Oh, maybe I have to. Oh my goodness, it's not going to work. That's sad. I had it working yesterday. Well, look, what I will do, I think, is I won't show you this now, but in a moment I'll try to flick to another video and show you this. It's worth seeing. It's super cool video, and hopefully it will play. This one will play. So that was coming down, and I take the blood gas, and I'll go to another screen and show you in a moment. And I don't think this is going to work either, unfortunately. So this is him coming towards the surface, and he puts his arm out, and Tom takes the video. So look, I'll show you that I've got the video on my desktop, so hopefully I'll be able to play it for you in a moment. This is, so once he gets to the surface, the surface gas is taken. Xavier takes the gas off his wrist and analyzes it through the iStat device. And so, look, as I said, I can't quite believe it all worked, but it did. And we published that fairly quickly, actually, in Journal of Applied Physiology last year. And I'll just show you the results. So this is the arterial oxygen result. So look, just follow me through here. It all looks pretty complicated, but it's not really. So what you see on the y-axis on the left is arterial PO2. And over on the right, the y-axis is depth in meters of fresh water. And obviously the x-axis is time. The gray line is the actual dive. So a descent over a minute, a very short period of time at the bottom, 12, 13 seconds while I took the gas, and then surfacing again over a period of a minute. So looking at the trace, at rest, surface on the boat, an arterial PO2 of 12 kilopascals. So that's, just around about, 100 millimeters of mercury. It's kind of what you'd expect for an arterial blood gas. And then at the end of his pre-dive packing routine, where he hyperventilates and does a bit of glossopharyngeal insufflation, it's risen to 16 kilopascals. So you do achieve a small increase in your arterial PO2 by hyperventilating and packing. And then we see the descent. So this massive increase in the arterial PO2. So these two blue lines are the two separate dives. And there's a difference between the dives. I mean, we're not sure. We don't really know how to explain that. The first dive is the higher one. The second dive is the lower one. And it's probable that he was he'd been floating around head up in the water a bit more before that second dive, and he might have had a bit of basal atelectasis from that, with a bit of VQ mismatch, which would produce a lower arterial PO2. But anyway, I mean, that's just biology. So yeah, this massive spike to 40 kilopascals, over 300 millimeters of mercury at the bottom, even though he's holding his breath and consuming oxygen. The PO2 goes up through this process of compressing the lungs. And then we see this decline in the arterial PO2 down to 8 kilopascals, which is about 60 millimeters of mercury. So, definitely borderline hypoxia. The key thing is that decline, or that decrease, occurs over the space of literally a minute. So we go from 43 kilopascals to 8 kilopascals in a minute. I mean, there's no clinical or environmental circumstance under which you would see your arterial PO2 plummet like that. And that's a 60-meter dive. These guys are doing 100. He's done 126 meters. So I think what we see here is support for that paradigm that you get this incredibly quick fall in the PO2. And if this was a deeper dive, or he'd spent a little bit longer at depth, you could easily be getting into a range where he might become hypoxic. And exactly the same pattern on the second 60-meter dive, just a slightly lower peak arterial oxygen. So interesting, but we can't really explain that. And then this orange line here is the surface static apnea. So just lying on the surface, holding your breath, and you see just this sort of gradual decline in PO2, which is exactly what you'd expect, but without any kind of pressure-induced spike. So that's the arterial oxygen. And then here we see, this is just to remind you that, at that point where he surfaced, this is, the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve, which you're all familiar with from, medical school physiology days, or if you're an anaesthetist, you think about it every day. But 60 millimeters of mercury, PO2 on the x-axis there, which is what his PO2 was when he arrived at the surface. You're still very well saturated, in fact, but you are on the sort of steep part of the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. And if your PO2 falls much more, then your oxygen carriage is going to be decreasing very quickly. So it just reminds us of the potential hazards there. Now, one of the things that we saw that we weren't expecting, which was interesting, were the changes in arterial carbon dioxide. So again, so the graph is the same. It just has arterial carbon dioxide on the y-axis on the left and depth on the y-axis on the right. And so that what we see right over on the left there, the resting specimen on the boat, an arterial PCO2 of 4.8 kilopascals. So that's normal. It's probably 36, 37 millimeters of mercury. And then at the end of his pre-dive hyperventilation packing routine, he's actually done a pretty good job of lowering that CO2. So 2.8 kilopascals, that's low. And then what we see in the two dives, again, is this pressure-induced spike at depth. Now, why I say we weren't so much expecting that is that CO2 is an extraordinarily soluble molecule. I mean, we knew that if you get a spike in oxygen, you would be you'd have a raised CO2 in your alveoli with the lungs being compressed at depth. But we didn't expect to see that reflected so strongly in the arterial blood, just because of the high solubility of CO2. We'd expect it just to sort of all disappear and to be buffered in the blood, basically. But we didn't. There definitely was a small CO2 spike up to about 6.3 kilopascals, which isn't particularly high. But remember, again, this was a 60-meter dive, not a 120 or 150-meter dive, which some of these people are getting to in these very short spaces of time. And it does beg the question of what your arterial CO2 might do on a very, very deep dive, and whether some of the strange symptoms that these guys get from time to time could be explained by a precipitous increase in arterial CO2. And then we see the CO2 decline on the way back to the surface. And that's what tells us it's not just normal metabolic production, because if it was, you wouldn't see that decline as you came back towards the surface. And then once again, the orange line is the static apnea at the surface, where we just see a steady increase in the CO2, which is what you'd expect someone who's apneic, without the spike before at depth, because you're just lying on the surface. So that was an interesting finding, and something that we'd quite like to follow up, in fact. And William Trubridge is very keen to do this, because he's always believed that CO2 might be causing him symptoms at depth. So look, in summary, these results do support that accepted pathophysiological paradigm for shallow water blackout. And, I think that there was already data pointing in that direction, but I think that having these data from open water competition format, a deep dive, so 20 meters deeper than it had ever been done before, 60 meters, but using a dive format that complies exactly with one of the AIDA competition dive formats, was a good thing to do. And this increase in arterial CO2 should be investigated in deeper dives. So look, there's a picture of me taking if we can't get the video to work, at least you've seen a picture of it. So that's Dave at the 60-meter mark with me unclipping one of the limbs on the splitter and aspirating an arterial blood gas. And there's just a few of the people that were involved, and we want to acknowledge over there on the right. So look, that's the presentation. Now I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to come out of presenter mode and come out of, hopefully I'm still sharing my screen. Can you still see my screen, Mornay, or?
You've just removed it.
Okay, right. So,
but it's fine. You can find the video you want, and put it where it is, and then just through the platform share it, and I'll add it to the stack.
It's on my desktop, so let me see if I can. Share my screen and we'll see if we can find it. So. So window, now let me see here. Let's just go to this, and I'm just navigating around here.
Okay. I can see you busy there, but do you mind if I add it in the meantime, or you first want to find the video?
There's the video now. So if you want to share that would be really good. If you can put that up.
Okay. Well, so I can only at this stage still see your, part of your computer with the files that you're looking at, not the video.
Okay.
So I think you might have to go back to share and then select that. The video itself. If you say share screen,
I'll try that again then.
Yeah.
So we won't persist with this for too long, but we'll just see if it works. It works.
There's you can share a video file. I don't know.
You mean that? How's that? Can you see that?
Just hang tight. Let me. No, I can't. So you haven't shared it yet. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let me share my desktop. Okay. So can you see my desktop there?
It's coming on board. Yeah, I can see that.
Okay. So now I'm going to the video.
All right. I can see you double clicking it.
Yeah. Is that popped up?
No.
No, it's not. It's I don't know why it's not coming up.
So Simon, if you want to try one other, I can try and navigate you. If you click that share button again, and I don't know, when you click share, I guess you get slides, extra camera, video file, and share screen. I don't know if you see that when you hit that share button.
Oh, video file. Yeah, I'll try that.
Then,
okay.
Then you can navigate through your computer until you find the file. There, I can see it now. Okay. Hold on. Let me just pop it onto the screen. Okay,
yeah.
it's busy. It's getting there. Okay. I can see people on a road, obviously preparing.
Yeah, it's not playing smoothly though, unfortunately. Now I don't know why. Well, technology. Well, look, you've seen the photo. It just shows the video of Dave coming down and me taking the gas. So look, I'm going to stop. Why don't you just take that? Oh, there, it's jumping around a bit now.
Yeah, it's going a bit. I can see some. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not playing smoothly though, is it?
Okay. All right. Well, shall we see if there are any questions?
Why don't you we'll get rid of all that and
okay, there we go. Okay.
So I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have, obviously.
All right. Well, Simon, can you see the two of us on your screen at this stage?
I can, yeah.
Okay. So Don Solomon, he had a question there. I don't know if you can see it pop up on your screen. He wants to know what the altitude of the lake was.
Yeah, good question. It's 1,000 feet, yeah.
Okay.
So we had a small compensation to make in our decompression for, like I say, we had 36 minutes at 60 meters, so a decompression in just a little bit over 2 hours on rebreathers, so it was, we were in dry suits, so it was okay. Actually, it was quite cold at the bottom. It was 10 degrees at 60 meters. We weren't actually at the bottom, we were just hanging in mid-water, but that was another thing that amazed me about Dave. Like I always found, as a free diver, I always found it harder to hold my breath when I was in cold water, and that was cold down there. It was cold. I mean, we were okay in dry suits, but I was pretty impressed. But yeah, it's 1,000 feet. Not a massive change in atmospheric pressure from a free diver's point of view, but altitude nonetheless. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to run through some of the comments. Paul just says, amazing, educational, excellent work. Thank you very much. I don't know if he has a question. I think good divers don't hyperventilate. They just breathe normally and then pack it. Because
yeah, that's a really interesting comment, actually, if I could pick up on that. Look, they all say that, right? They all say that. That's true. But the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, Dave sort of says that too. We've called it hyperventilation because that's obviously what it is. I mean, his CO2 went from 4.8 to 2.8. Like that's quite a big reduction in your arterial CO2. Now, he would say that he didn't hyperventilate before that dive. He would say that he went through his normal pre-dive routine, which includes some sort of sanity, inducing slow, deep breaths. None of them call it hyperventilation because you're quite right. I mean, whoever made that comment, because they know that too much hyperventilation is definitely a risk factor. However, I bet you if you did arterial gases on all of these people who say they don't hyperventilate, whatever their pre-dive routine is, it would involve some degree of lowering their CO2. They all do it, even if they don't realize they're doing it. They call it their pre-dive, just the packing process. I think they do some deepish breathing before that, and it does lower their CO2. But you're right. You're right. That's what the free divers believe they don't hyperventilate. But I think the truth is they all do to some extent.
Okay. Just a couple of thank yous. And let's see, Michael Marshall. I think you know him, Simon, from Durban side. He says thanks. Very informative presentation. Much appreciated from Durban. Let's see what we've got here. Thank you very much. Amazing presentation. Study done. Okay. We got some more bodies here. Question. What's it? Does body and surrounding water temperature play a role in the blood gas exchange?
Yeah, really good question. And of course, difficult to investigate in a meaningful way. I mean, I think It's a really good question in the context of our results, actually, because that was one of the things we asked ourselves when we had that lower peak arterial oxygen in the second dive. Could it be that he was cold? Because he definitely was, like he was colder on that second dive. Could it be something to do with increased oxygen metabolism? We were trying to explain that lower peak arterial oxygen level, and we never really could. So that was one of the thoughts we had. It could well be something to do with being cold and consuming more oxygen, but we just don't know. So I mean, yes, I think if you're cold, you do metabolize oxygen quicker. Just through thermogenesis and things like shivering. I mean, shivering really consumes oxygen. But one of the things about this is that every data point is a precious gift. It's hard to do this, and you can't. You're never going to have a study where you've got 50 people doing this, and like you can actually start to interrogate questions like this. It's really hard. So I don't have an answer. I don't have a definitive answer, but certainly theoretically, yes, it could play a role. Not so much in gas exchange, but in terms of the results you get through altering oxygen consumption.
All right. So the chaps from Mate and Scuba, do you intend redoing the same study at deeper depths?
Yeah, so we do. We are. In fact, if it weren't for COVID, we would have done it. It was tragic. We had William Trubridge actually spent summer in New Zealand from the Bahamas. He spent summer here this last summer, and we got ethics approval to repeat the study at 90 meters, which he was totally up for. It's 90 meters is still fine for Pete and I, and we would have done it, but unfortunately we had our Omicron outbreak, and we just weren't allowed to do any research of that nature during that time. So we had to put it off, but we have the ethics approval, and we're really just waiting for a time when either William can come here or we can go to the Bahamas. I would actually prefer to do it here because we're kind of set up and we have all the right support people in place. But, we could probably do it over there. I'm just a little bit worried about the medical backup over there. But, yeah, I'm sure all these things can be worked around. But yes is the answer. Yeah, we're planning to do that, especially to look at that CO2 spike. That's what William's really interested in.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Dive Bunny from the States. Any future plans to do some extra studies on the CO2 at depth?
Yeah, well, that was the answer to the last question.
Okay, yeah,
exactly.
All right. So,
we are. We the moment we saw those CO2 results, we thought, okay, we need to follow this up a little bit more carefully, and we put in an ethics application to do it. So we're all set to go, but we're just waiting to have a free diver who will do it. Yeah.
Okay. And then just some more thank yous there for all the videos and interesting topics that you release. So yeah, thanks, Louis.
I don't release them. Other people record these talks and go to the trouble, like Mornay, and so I'm really appreciative of them because there's no doubt about it. In this connected world, all of this stuff is great, and watching a video isn't quite the same, and we don't get the chance to exchange ideas like this. But the videos are cool, and it's my pleasure. That's why we do this stuff. So we can inform the community. Yeah, passive hyperventilation. Yeah.
Okay, is that
at a physiological level, as a physiologist, we call it hyperventilation, but because anything that lowers your CO2 is hyperventilation, right? Because CO2 is usually relatively stable, and our brains keep our CO2 levels relatively normal. This is going on in all of us as we sit here and talk right now. Our brains are monitoring CO2 levels and adjusting ventilation to achieve that. So if you lower your CO2, it is hyperventilation. But you're right, that's exactly, the free divers have these terms for it. they don't like to just come out and say, oh yeah, we actually do hyperventilate, because they say,
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm not being critical, by the way. They are aware of this, they're aware of the risks, and they try not to overdo it. And you know, Dave was exactly like that. But I think when you actually measure the CO2 in the arterial blood before and after their pre-dive routine, I think you'll find that they do drop it, just like he did.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, we've got another question. I don't know if this is the one that you answered earlier or not, but yeah.
Well, I presume the question is talking about a deeper depth. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. That's right. So we want to do exactly the same thing. We want to repeat what you just saw at a deeper depth. And we're sort of thinking 80, 90 meters. I mean, it's very dependent on the freediver, because it's a pretty big thing for them to come and, it's not in their usual sort of protocols to pause at depth and allow someone, 10 seconds to take an arterial blood gas specimen and then get to the surface and not breathe immediately. I mean, that must go against all their instincts, because the way they train and practice is to breathe the minute they get to the surface. So, well, actually, they have to. And I think they can. I think they can breathe as soon as they get to the surface. They have to show that they're still conscious for the dive to count. But yeah, we are planning to do it at that deeper depth. Yeah.
All right. So Don's got quite a nice question and wants to know about the blood shift effects and the O2 consumption.
Yeah. Well, there's quite a lot packed into that question. And I'm not really capable of answering all of it. The blood shift, I presume you're thinking of, is the blood shifts that we see actually in pretty much anyone, whether you're a diver or a swimmer or anyone immersed in water with their head out, will experience what Don's referring to as a blood shift. So when you're vertical in the water and head out, so your airway is connected to the sort of atmospheric pressure, that means that the pressure of gas in your airways is at the same pressure as the pressure at your mouth, whereas your lungs are actually submerged and subject to a greater surrounding pressure than the pressure inside the airways. And so we call that a negative static lung load. And what that does is it promotes the shifting of blood, and it's because something tries to fill that void, right? And so the way the body does that is blood moves into the thorax, into the chest, and into the lung circulation, which is quite distensible. And so you get this. In fact, this is how the lungs compensate for being compressed below residual volume at depth. You get this blood shift into the lungs. And so, yeah, you almost make it worse at depth with the compression of the lungs. And that does a number of things. It reduces the gas volume of the lungs. It increases the blood volume. It makes the lungs stiffer and less compliant. But what it actually does to gas exchange or oxygen consumption is, I think, not well sorted out. So I can't really answer that part of the question. We believe it has quite important effects in terms of work of breathing when you're a scuba diver and you're actually trying to breathe underwater, because that blood shift makes your lungs quite a lot stiffer and less compliant. And so you need to use more energy to move gas in and out of them. And that's actually quite a big factor for very deep diving by technical divers who are using dense gas, which also increases your work of breathing. It's one of the things that we invoked as an explanation for the respiratory failure that David Shaw experienced in the cave in South Africa. Many of you might remember that. Franz Cronje and I wrote a paper on that, looking at the effects of that whole business of increased work of breathing at depth and how that can impact on gas exchange. But that's not really a factor for freedivers because they're not trying to breathe. However, that blood shift does cause complications in freediving. So in some very extreme free dives now, we're getting, especially with the lung packing that's going on, and that combined with the blood shift into the lungs, it's creating quite a lot of tissue tension in the lungs. And some of these divers are suffering, hemoptysis, or breathing into their lungs at depth and coughing up blood when they come back to the surface in these very extreme exposures. So there are lots of implications of that. But in terms of oxygen consumption, it doesn't make any sense to me that of itself would change oxygen consumption, because oxygen consumption is driven by other factors in your body, what your muscles are doing, the oxygen consumption by, your brain and everything else that's needing oxygen. But I don't think that the actual changes that you're seeing in the lungs would change the oxygen consumption. It might change the oxygen exchange, but in ways that I can't really anticipate.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Don, I hope that helps. Yeah, I've got one more question, couple of things, and a request. So, we've got one from Matt and Scuba again. What are they?
Well, I think the change in gas density and the changes in the pressures of the gases in the lungs at depth is just part of the natural process of holding your breath and diving down. It's actually what you expect. And in fact, the movement of gas in response to that increased pressure is exactly what we're measuring with the arterial blood gas, where the increase in the PO2 is a manifestation of an increase in the gas pressures and density, but the pressures inside the lungs. And those pressures are reflected by increased diffusion of oxygen into the blood, and we measure a higher pressure of oxygen in the blood as a result. So it's not a matter of compensating for it. It's actually that's what we're setting out to measure. So that's the phenomenon we're interested in. Yeah.
All right. So, Mate and Scuba, as always, thank you for joining us. But they seem to enjoy the presentation, and it seems
I'm
like
sorry about the video. That video has worked every other time I've done it. It must be something about the platform and the way it. Anyway, look, you saw the photograph. It's just quite cool seeing Dave come down and turn around having that blood gas done. I still can't quite believe it all worked, like there were so many moving parts that had to sort of gel and work together.
So we just got a thank you, Jakob, thank you for that. And just another request for the video. So I don't know how we can do that. If you want to share them, we can make a plan. I
don't think there'd be any objection to us to putting that video online. It's been shown lots of presentations. There's nothing copyright about it. I'm sure Pete wouldn't mind. I'll talk to you about that, Mornay. If you were prepared to put it online for us, I would.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can make a plan. I can share that and get that out to the folks that registered via the platform that I put out there, and then I could share those videos as an additional sort of follow-up email, and then the folks that are keen can obviously view that.
Yeah, why don't we do it that way? That's a cool idea. Yeah, no, we'll do it. I'll put it in Dropbox for you, and you can you can put it online, and it's actually there's a 4-minute compilation video of the whole process, including the dive, and we'll just put that up. And and it sort of tells the story of the whole thing. So
awesome! All right. Well, I hope that people, I'm sure they'll enjoy that. Well, it seems like we got to the end of the questions and thank yous and remarks. But before we go, I just want to share this slide again with you folks for those that weren't able to scan the QR code to get hold of that heart and diving guide that I mentioned at the start of the presentation. So it's just a free gift from Dan if you want it. It's really nice, well put together. If you scan that code using your mobile device or a QR scanner, whichever you have, Generally, the phones nowadays just pick up those codes and open up, either a site. But in this case, it opens up your WhatsApp with a pre-populated message. And all I ask is that you just add your name and your surname so I know who I'm talking to. And, then I'll just send you the download link. And in fact, in the message, I've added a link to a YouTube playlist that's got all the heart and diving videos on that Dr. Franz Grenier helped put together for us. So that's also quite nice. So, just scan the code and I'll send you that link. So hopefully you enjoy it. Let me just take this away. Okay, great. Well, Simon, from my side, as always, thank you very much. It was a great presentation, and wow, I'm sure you enjoyed doing the study. I mean, it's a little bit of uncertainty, but there was a clear sort of goal in mind, and I guess also it helps having disciplined people and athletes that understand what it's about. And then you guys had all the support there, so I'm sure there was a lot of excitement all around while sort of planning it, getting it sorted before the time, and then obviously while you did it. So afterwards, I'm sure everybody was pleased with the end results.
Yeah, no, it was amazing, great fun, and a great example of the super cool little projects that are out there for people interested in this field to do. So if there's any junior doctors who want research projects, there's plenty of good ideas and lots of really good people in South Africa who can help you. So
yeah. And then from my side, thank you for the shout out regarding Cecilia. Absolute great person, and it was very sad to lose her, but I think whoever got to know her, she left a mark, and we'll never forget her. So thanks for that, Simon.
No, we won't forget her. You're absolutely right.
All right. Well, I guess you're going to get ready for the day. I'm about to, head to bed soon. So for the rest of you, thank you for making the time. And until the next webinar, good night and goodbye.
Good night.